Hi everyone, this is Jill Ham, owner and founder of the Children's Dyslexia Center of Georgia, now Colorado and Arizona. So one of the number one questions that I get asked after I do a consultation and parents come in my office is, how is your program different than all the other programs on the market? So I'm going to kind of explain to you how our program is different, and it will explain working memory, processing, everything that goes on in the brain, and why our program is really good at remediating dyslexia between 6 months to a year versus 3 and 4 years with tutors. But the number one thing that you have to remember about my center is that you work exclusively with me one-on-one, no one else. And people always ask, how do you do it? I just do it. I spend certain days at certain centers, and my schedule is totally full at all of my centers. But the most important thing is that you're working with someone that has credentials, someone that has an education degree. I have an education degree, a master's degree, a reading specialist, an EDS. And I've been a special ed teacher. I've taught for a lot of years. I went into special education, then I went into consulting, then I was a special education RTI director for schools. So know that credentials has a lot to do with developing a program like ours. So my program was totally developed by me. It's an OG-based program. That's another question that we always get. But it's designed uniquely and specifically for your child and your child's brain. So when your child comes in and does a screening with me, then I develop and tweak my program for that specific child. So watch this. This is how it works. And if you are sitting in my office right now as a parent and you are on the floor with me and we're outside because it's a beautiful day, this is exactly what I would draw and exactly how I would explain it. This is your brain, and you have two hemispheres. You have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. Your left hemisphere, always think of language, anything you write, anything you read, anything you speak. Anything you hear always goes on this L side. Think of L2 for learning. Any type of learning takes place on this side of the brain. Right side, that's my creative side. So what happens is when a child comes into my center, the first thing I do, I have the child write their alphabet. And I can sit here right now and I can write my alphabet. I don't hesitate, meaning I don't stop and think, what does that letter look like? Is it go this way? Does it go this way? I don't inverse, meaning I don't start my letters from the bottom and go like this. I don't draw my letters. A lot of kids will draw a G and then they'll go like this. They'll draw an A and they'll go like this. That's drawing your letters. You're doing a circle and then you're doing a stick. But I can sit here, I can talk to you at the same time, and I can write my letters fluidly. That's all in one motion. I don't have to go, okay, circle, stick. So the most important part of your brain and your brain writing and learning sounds, this is your key. There are what I call pathways, or it's kind of like a ladder. If this bridge doesn't open, can't get to this one. If you can't climb this one, can't get to this one. All of these are connected, and you have to open this one to get to this one. This one right here, I call the ABCs. This right here is exactly this. Being able to write your letters correctly. If you're writing your letter like a circle, stick, stick, circle. This is when B's, D's, P's, and Q's get mixed up. The most important thing that parents need to realize is that your child isn't reading backwards. When they're flipping their B's, their D's, their P's, their Q's, their M's, their W's, their N's, and their U's, this is because when they first started writing, they were in kindergarten, first grade. Remember that alphabet strip that was above the chalkboard in the classroom? That's what they're doing. So when they can't fluidly write their letters by memory, and it's just one fluid motion, they draw their letters. So they look up at that alphabet strip and they say, okay, an A is a circle, and it's a stick. A B is a stick and a circle. A D is a stick and a circle. A P is a stick and a circle. So what that child has trained their brain to learn is that letters are segments, that they are drawings. Circle, stick, stick, circle. So the brain cannot discriminate between B's, D's, P's, Q's, because the brain has learned they're all circles and sticks. So what happens is when a child goes to write their letters, you see them hesitate. And you can even ask your child this. When you see a hesitation on a letter, you can say, are you thinking about what it looks like? 99.9% of the time they're going to say yes, because they're very visual learners and they stop and they think, okay, what's a B look like? Well, because they're doing that, then the brain confuses the letters. The brain is drawing the letters. Not everything is just one fluid motion. So therefore, the brain just sees these as circle, stick, stick, circle, circle, stick. There's no difference between B's, D's, P's, and Q's to the brain, or the M's and the W's and the N's and U's, and that's why it gets confusing. So what happens is, when this pathway doesn't open, which is just me being able to fluidly write my letters, when I can fluidly write my letters, then my brain doesn't look at that and say, oh, circle, stick. It looks at it and says, A, B, B, K, D. Then I can quickly connect my sounds to my letters. If that does not happen, then what happens is one day the child will say and the next day they'll say A. They will revert back to the letter name because they revert back to what's in memory the longest, and it's the alphabet song. They've learned that song their whole life, so their brain reverts back what's into long-term memory and what's fluid to them. So this is why our program, anytime you see after like lesson 1 and lesson 2, a child's handwriting is totally corrected, all the letters are corrected, it has to be. That is key to helping a child with dyslexia and takes years off of their growth if you don't fix that. Because what happens is if they can't fluidly write those letters and connect those sounds, their brain is always glitching. There's always a little pause, a hesitation. So writing is really hard. It's laborious. It's not fluid. They're melting down when you ask them to write, and it's super hard. But what happens is if this pathway doesn't open, the next step on the ladder, you can't get to it. And this is when your brain first learns to spell, learns to connect sounds to letter, and learns to pull apart words. A lot of kids that can't pull apart a word left to right, when they go to read a word, they'll visually insert a word that looks similar to it. So instead of hose, the child will say horse or house. So let me show you. Now that my brain can do this, my brain can write all these letters fluidly and can connect the sounds. Then when I give simple CVC words, which is the next step in reading and writing, the second pathway, when I do this and I give you this, my brain can go, okay, there's the first sound, second sound, ah, third sound, f, ah, f, roff. My brain phonological memory kicks in. I can pull it apart, beginning, middle, end, not chunk it. You don't want a child chunking these because then you're teaching the brain that there's only 2 sounds. There's 3 sounds here, a beginning sound, a middle sound, and an end sound. This is not only the first stage to reading, but it's the first stage to spelling. Huge for children, because if not, what happens is if this pathway doesn't open and this one doesn't open, some days you'll get some days they'll say R, because that's not a connected. It didn't connect here, so I'm going to revert back to what's in long-term memory, which is the letter name. So instead of I might say R, and instead of O, I might say ah. Normally for this, I get rough, I get roof, I get 4. And why do I get 4? Because that's the only other 3-letter word combination that my brain has memorized, which this is a sight word. So what happens is when my brain cannot pull apart words, and this is why vision therapy, we hear thousands and thousands of clients that have done vision therapy thinking it's an eye issue. It's not. It's not. This is where my brain learns to pull apart words and it learns to track left to right. So if I'm a sight word reader, which a lot of programs do now, they don't teach phonics, they teach whole language, which are sight words. So if I'm flipping through sight words and they're on index cards and I'm flipping through, then you're training my brain to look at the whole word. You're not training my brain to break down the word and put it back together. So you have trained my brain to flip through sight words. So you're training my brain to jump from word to word. Well, what happens is when my eyes don't track fluidly and I can't pull apart a word, and you've taught my brain to jump from sight word to sight word to sight word, that's exactly what I'm going to do when I read. I'm going to read and I'm going to jump from word to word to word to word to word, and my eyes are going to get fatigued. They're going to get tired. There's muscle back there. So what happens is then when I come to a word I don't know, like hose, I can't go E makes O say its name, O's, hose. I can't break it down left to right. So what my brain does, it quickly accommodates for me. It's going to give me a word that looks visually similar to that. So I'm going to say horse or house. That's what's going to happen. These 2 pathways are so crucial, I cannot tell you. So what happens is when this pathway opens, Then I can go to the next pathway, which is the first stages of decoding, pulling apart words, putting them back together, spelling, and I'm training my eyes. My brain is training my eyes to go left to right, not jumping from word to word like sight words do. The next pathway, super, uber, duper important. And this is why so many parents say, Jill, do you know how many times I've told my child the E on the end of the word makes the vowel in the middle say its name? And it doesn't stick. It doesn't stick because these two pathways aren't open. If these aren't open, you can't get to this one. All of those 42 phonological rules makes no sense to the child. So what happens is this pathway right here, these are all of those rules. So that's why when you see on our Instagram, on our website, Dyslexia Center Georgia, or our Facebook pages, Dyslexia Georgia, Colorado, or Arizona, you see after lesson 1, 2, and 3, I really try heavily to post the child's before writing, their after writing, because those show those pathways are open and they're firing. So when these pathways open and they fire continuously and they start to fire off more and more, and we've got more branches that are firing. And that's when parents are like, oh my gosh, Jill, it's getting quicker, their handwriting's awesome. That's what you want. You should not go home and not be able to do it the next day. If you can tie your shoes today, you should be able to tie them tomorrow, and the next day you just get faster. That's what opening pathways is about. Okay? We are not about repetition. We are not about come 4 or 5 times a week. We're going to do it 45 minutes. It's not opening pathways. That's repetition and hoping that it sticks to your brain. So what happens is that once this pathway opens and this pathway opens, and then we're in this pathway the longest. That's when you see on Instagram and Facebook, I'm showing you sentences that the kids have written, like Fred bred a crop of frogs. This is an R blend lesson. And if you look at their sentence from before they started our program, it's totally unreadable. All the letters are scrambled, and that shows why it's so important to open these two up. Because if you don't open these two up, you can't do this one. And these are the kids that can't progress in their reading. Your brain can only memorize about 2,000 words, and then it stops. So it gets you to about a 3rd grade level, and then you top off, and your reading will not increase. Your fluency doesn't increase. Your processing speed doesn't increase, because what happens is, once you get to this pathway, and you've memorized and you can work on, and your brain is hitting those rules, then what happens is all of this connects, and this is your comprehension, your reading comprehension and your working memory. So all of these lead up to all of it working together. But if you're not targeting these pathways specifically and designing a program that's unique to that child, then it's going to take you years, because you're doing what we call a box program, a one-size-all type of program, which they're awesome. Barton, oh my goodness, Susan Barton's program, amazing for tutors, for schools, for teachers that aren't trained. Wilson program, I love all of those programs because it gives every child an opportunity to learn and to remediate their dyslexia. But if you're working with a specialist and you come into my office or another specialist's office, they should be able to explain the brain to you. They should be able to tell you what's going on with the brain, why a child's flipping B's, D's, P's, and Q's. What are the stages of learning, and what are the stages of remediating the dyslexia, and how do you remediate it without having to do tons and tons of repetition? But this very last pathway is huge. It's your child's working memory. You being able to give your child a sentence that's 8, 9 words long and that they can remember it. Moms and dads will tell you, when a child comes into my center from lesson 1 to lesson 20, we are repeating sentences to them, and they are writing them down and applying the rules. After lesson 20, you can give any of my clients a sentence that is 10, 12 words long. They can remember every single word of it. That's working memory. And that's huge, because when that child's in the classroom and they're listening to the instructor, you want them to not only be able to hear the instructor, to be able to process what they're saying, taking notes. A lot of kids, when they're taking notes, they don't hear anything that the teacher or the professor is saying, because their brain is so worried about, oh my gosh, I've got to hold on to the word, I've got to write the letters correctly, that it can't even focus on what the teacher is saying. So that's why working memory is so crucial. It's so crucial that if somebody gives you 2 or 3 things to do, that you can remember those 2 or 3 things the same way as remembering a sentence and being able to explain the sentence back and write the sentence and explain the, the phonetic rules to it. but it is so crucial to children and their learning and their development. Multiplication facts, addition facts, subtraction facts, all of that. So working memory is critical. So this is how, when children come into our center, working memory is really hard for them, but it's because those pathways have not been targeted. You have to target them specifically in your lessons and in the 15-20 minutes of homework you do every night with a child after you leave my center. It is all targeted to all of these pathways and correcting the working memory. That's why it's so important. So this really explains kind of the brain, dyslexia, the pathways, and why working memory, why opening these pathways are so important to a child. Because if you're doing a program that's not uniquely designed for you, that's not uniquely targeted for your child, it's going to take repetition and it's going to take extra help and you doing the lessons over and over and over again, because you're not targeting what needs to be targeted for that child's brain. And that's okay. Some centers don't have a specialist like me that's designed a program like this. Our center, after lesson 3, that's open and that's open. And that's why we always post those pictures. This pathway though, with all of those phonics rules, that takes us about 5 months, and we can get all of this done between, I'd say, 6 and 8 months roughly, depending on the child and if there's school holidays, if the child's sick, vice versa. But this is what happens with the brain. This is why a child flips their B's, their D's, their P's, their Q's. This is why they insert words that look visually similar. So our program specifically is designed for your child, and how do we open these? How do we get it going? So I would really encourage you, check out our Facebook pages at Dyslexia Georgia, Dyslexia Colorado, Dyslexia Arizona. We are posting awesome before and after pictures of kids every week. And when a child comes in our center, they have a psychological done and we have beginning scores. And when after they're finished our program, a few weeks after, we have them go and have another psychological done that we take care of, we provide. And it shows that they are in the average to above average areas of reading, that it's remediated. So it's totally awesome. These kids are amazing, great. So if you have questions, just let me know.